Hello, and thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Karen Brett, and I'm the Events Manager here at ADP. Before we start, I'll just explain the interface on your screen. The main window is where your presentation slides will be displayed, and you should also see a Q&A box as well. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session, and you'll be able to type in any questions you may have for our speakers there. We will be tweeting live throughout the webinar and directly afterwards, and would love you to join the conversation using hashtag ADPwebinar. You can follow us on @ADP_UK. We're delighted to welcome Dan Archer as our guest speaker today. Dan is an experienced franchise professional and a former board member of the British Franchise Association, which is a self-regulating body for the UK's franchise industry. A passionate advocate for small businesses, he has over 18 years' experience of helping people into self-employment and has gained a huge amount of expertise across a multitude of organisations. Through his work with several hundred franchises and small business, his knowledge of the sector is invaluable, and he will be sharing some of the insight he's learnt with us here today. Also joining us is Matthew Oakley from ADP. Having worked across a number of sectors, Matthew has specialised in enabling small and large businesses to grow through change. And in the last 5 years, Matthew has worked in the HR consultancy and technology space and has managed a number of teams who have worked specifically with small businesses. So welcome today to Dan and Matthew. Okay, so we know that managing human resources is an issue for all employers, irrespective of the size or industry, as well as controlling a broad range of business-critical activities, including recruitment, payroll, benefits and employee engagement. It also requires in-depth knowledge of employment law, which is constantly evolving to meet the changing needs and demands of the workplace. And 99% of all companies in Europe are SMEs, so that means that they're collectively responsible for 2 out of every 3 private sector jobs. So it's clear that even though your company may be small, you're bound by many of the same rules and regulations for managing the workplace. The impact of non-compliance is potentially bigger and more devastating for small companies than their larger counterparts. So you need to make sure you have the correct support in place if you're going to avoid fines, penalties, and time-consuming tribunals. Small business, of course, will have very different challenges around legal compliance. So Dan and Matthew, from your experience of talking to and running small businesses, what are the particular challenges facing small business with employment law compliance?
Thanks, Karen. So from my point of view, the key thing here is that small businesses and the communities within they operate, it's just so varied. So you could have a long-standing family business through to an entrepreneurial startup. But the thing that's common across all of these is really that these organisations are solely focused on what's important to them, which is their business. It could be very personal. So whether they're selling widgets or delivering a service, the thing that drives them, that gets them up on a day-to-day basis, is the passion for their company. But within that, all of the small businesses are going to be focused on, for me, 2 key things, and it could be one or either or both. And that really is around, how do I drive my business forward and how do I grow, through to how do I protect, what I've spent a huge amount of time and effort to build up. So if they're concentrating on these things, how do they keep up to date with what's impacting their workforce and their workplace? We know that the workforce and workplace rules are changing all the time. So do they have the capacity, do they have the knowledge, and do they have the skills to make sure that they're managing this not just compliantly but also positively?
Yeah, and I think I'd probably add to that my experience of sort of working with SMEs through that growth phase, that one of the challenges that they face when they are operational in the business is that they spend a lot of time doing what they do. They work in their business, and they don't really get enough time to work on the business. And that transition of moving from being an owner-operator into being the MD of a larger organisation is sometimes a challenging one for businesses. I think I struggle a little bit sometimes with the celebrity business culture that we have, and we all talk about sort of Dragon's Den and the large organisations and the famous celebrity business people like sort of Richard Branson and Stelios Hadianu and the like. But the truth of the matter is, as Karen says, that the vast majority of businesses in the UK are small businesses, and they do face very specific challenges. One of the problems I have with the celebrity culture is it doesn't really focus on that transition from small to larger. And there is an element of fear sometimes around that from business people. They're concerned as to whether they can support the growth that they need in the right way. One of the things that we do with Red Flag Alert is to help businesses to sort of maintain that growth so that they're not worrying that they may go backwards once they've stepped forwards. And these challenges are around sort of recruiting staff for the first time, the fear of whether the business can maintain that because the individuals are then responsible not only for the business but also for their staff members. That's a key concern. But also where they can get the knowledge and the expertise to ensure that they do the right things by those members of staff when they're brought into the business. And I think the challenges there, as Karen says, that the legislation affects equally the large businesses and the small businesses. And the small businesses are potentially sometimes not as well equipped to be able to cope with the challenges of growth as they present themselves.
Okay, thanks, Dan. If we think kind of a little bit more specifically about HR legislation now, formally there are changes to employment law twice a year, once in April, once in October. And currently there are a number of new employment laws and rules being introduced. Just recently we've seen changes to shared parental leave and flexible working legislation. But also rulings are coming through from the tribunal courts all the time, which have impact on legal changes into the future. And you probably all heard Ed Miliband recently announced that if Labour wins the next general election, they'll double paternity leave and make changes to the statutory pay. So, how many small businesses are on top of existing legislation, let alone being aware of these potential new changes and proactively thinking about how they might manage them? Dan, how confident are you that small businesses are prepared and have the right resource in place?
I think the challenge is that the framework moves on a regular basis, and I think for a lot of small business people, they struggle to keep up with understanding the operational things of their business. The nature of the market that they operate in, the markets that they may be considering moving into, and indeed just the day-to-day running of the business. So that sort of broader picture of what changes within employment legislation or with cases that may go through legally is something that sometimes time is difficult to be allocated to that. Now, obviously, the danger for the employer is that the employer's got to worry about running the business as a whole and can keep a handle on everything that's going on. An employee potentially only has to worry about the things that affect them. And clearly, in the culture that we have at the moment within the UK and the media's ability to be able to tell a story very quickly, quite often employees are better informed at some of the things that have happened to other members of staff in other organisations than the employer who's focusing wholeheartedly on running their business may be. So I think that can create a situation there where an SME would need some support, yes.
So yeah, I agree completely, Dan, and I think for most small businesses it's knowing where to go to get that support. And with the ever-changing world of legislation, it adds and heaps additional layers of complexity for small business owners to deal with. So typically organisations could look to a number of sources for this sort of support, and the role that ACAS plays in that is increasing. And we've seen through changes to Tribunal, or the rules around Tribunal, that ACAS are taking a more leading role with pre-conciliation. Now, typically that means that they're getting involved earlier on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the impact on the business is reducing. So, from a business owner's point of view, who do they know, who can they trust to support them in the right way? And ACAS and many other organisations are in place to support the employee, but who's there to support the employer? So there's a lot of fear, I think, in most small organisations' minds about getting this wrong. And as Dan said, the media is doing a good job of propagating that. But it's not just about fear and scare stories. It's also, for me, in many organisations, about creating a positive environment in the workplace. So it's not just about fines and penalties, but it's also about trying to create the right environment to enable growth. And that can come in a number of different forms. So if you just think about it from a straightforward point of view, if a new starter comes into a small organisation and it's very clear to that new starter about what's expected of them, it's very clear in terms of how they're expected to develop and grow in that organisation, that's going to be a much more positive environment and would hopefully lead to increased engagement, better motivation, longer tenure, more committed employees, improved absenteeism, and of course, from a purely mercenary point of view, that could also lead to higher profits, and more growth within the organisation, which is obviously positive. So, a generally happier and more positive place to work can lead to a more successful organisation.
I think, yeah, absolutely, Matthew. And to add to that, I suppose, having watched organisations go through that process, the individuals that come into a business at that early stage can potentially be really strong, important members of the team going forward. I think if the culture's built correctly, then ultimately that first person that's recruited into a business may then end up being a sort of right-hand man or woman for the owner of the business going forward. The positive side of things here is you do the right things by the people that you bring into the organisation. They become a long-term supporter, and actually they become part of the success story of that organisation as it develops from a small business into a medium-sized business.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So having heard about the issues and challenges for small business, it's clear that small businesses obviously have a lot to think about. Working with an employment law expert can ensure that coping with upcoming and existing rules doesn't take up valuable time and money or put growing businesses at risk. So we'll now have a look at the options out there to help small businesses to ensure compliance. One of the most popular options is managing HR in-house, but according to one of the major job site websites, the average cost of an HR administrator is £22,000 a year, an HR manager is £45,000 a year, and an HR director is £80,000. So, how many small businesses are able to fund that?
Well, I think it's interesting from my perspective on this, because for the organisations of the scale that we're talking about here, this usually comes down to a choice of how they deploy the capital that they have available. Ultimately, if money was no object in an organisation, then you'd go and get the people that you needed, and you'd carry on doing the marketing that you needed to do, and you'd recruit the sales force that you needed to do, and you'd build the new plant that you needed to build, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the case for most business people. So that sort of first step into putting someone in an employed position is quite a tricky one, because ultimately there's no cheap way of doing it. What I've tended to find is that organisations will try and do a little bit themselves, but the justification for when you start spending 22, 45 or 80,000 pounds is quite a difficult one, because for the businesses concerned, that's normally money that actually should be allocated or could be allocated elsewhere in the organisation, and there will be a view from the people managing the business that it could potentially bring a different and a better benefit elsewhere in an organisation as well. So, the first step is quite an expensive one if you're looking at pulling a member of staff in to do that full time.
Yeah, it's just simply not practical for many of the small businesses that I know and have been to see over the years. But that doesn't take away from the importance of actually having somebody within the business that takes responsibility. So regardless of the business's approach to compliance in the workplace, they need to take it seriously, and they need to have resource within the organisation to tackle things, because it's not just about being reactive and having somebody to go to when an issue arises. It's also about being proactive as well. And the responsibility, needs to be felt by the organisation, but they need to have the right support in place, to help them to make sure they're making the right decisions. And so when you think about most organisations and how the sort of the HR and the compliance looks, it typically falls into somebody's remit where they're juggling multiple roles. And typically for me, that's somebody in an operational, administration, financial, or even in a senior position in the organisation. And the challenge that's always faced with that individual and for the organisation is how people allocate their time and how confident they feel that they're able to juggle all of those plates and keep them spinning. So it's not just in terms of the knowledge, but it's also the capacity to be able to follow up and act on areas of compliance. So in many cases, we see this often fall to the senior business leader. So whilst there may be an individual that has a responsibility, it's ultimately the business leader, the owner, that fundamentally is kept awake at night worrying with some of these issues. And there's a fantastic stat that demonstrates that 10% of Britain's SME leaders, including CEOs, MDs and directors, spend up to 2 days per week looking at HR issues, which is a significant portion of time when they're looking at growing their business or protecting their business. So Dan, as somebody that is acutely aware of these pressures, what do you think that means on the ground?
Well, I think practically, whether we're thinking of those 2 days as sort of 2 days out of 5 in a working week, I have to say my experience of most small business people is that they don't work a 5-day week. It does tend to run over into the weekend quite often as well. But 2 days is still a large chunk of time, and that's 2 days that actually you can't necessarily always plan for either. It's not like sort of putting a marketing campaign together and saying, right, on Tuesday we're going to go and do this piece of marketing, we're going to send out these direct mail pieces or whatever else it might be. You need to be reactive in some instances with the HR issues that get presented to a business. So you can't always guarantee necessarily that you'll have those 2 days available when you need them. And I think equally the 2 days that's quoted there is probably a low ball figure, because that's 2 days of actually doing it. If you're going to keep yourself up to speed with all the legislation and the changes around it as well, you could probably say that actually you're going to be putting another day at least on top of that to do the background reading and knowledge learn that you need to be able to ensure that you are the professional that you would need to be in that situation.
So, yeah, I think we're in agreement that for many small businesses, having a dedicated, professionally trained and accredited HR or health and safety practitioner in-house is just not feasible for many reasons. One of the other areas that is fairly common in terms of support for small businesses is around the local network, and typically that can fall into the remit for a local solicitor. Many small businesses are quite wedded to these sorts of networks, and they provide a fantastic source of support in many areas. But again, for me, it comes down to a number of factors. So one of the benefits from having local support through a solicitor is you quite often get that personal touch. That they understand the organisation, they're able to, in certain areas, tailor the support that they give to that organisation, because there's a level of relationship there. But with local solicitors or local consultants, it often comes down to capacity. So many local solicitors won't be necessarily employment law specialists, they'll be general practicing. So, how often do they come up against those meaty HR or employment law issues where you need not just legalistic but also practical expertise? But also, how available are they? So a local consultant that's dealing with 50 customers in the local area, let's be honest, they're going to take a holiday at some stage. So what happens when that serious disciplinary or grievance hits the MD's desk? Who are they going to pick the phone up to? And, what sits behind that support? So, who are supporting the local solicitors and the consultants? Where do they go to get their advice? And then the final piece, I think, with some of these services that can have a bit of a pay-as-you-go approach, how confident is the MD going to be that they want to pick the phone up? Are they going to just try and deal with it within their own organisation, because as soon as they pick the phone up, they know the clock is going to be ticking? So it may be a bit of an extreme statement to say this, but I think for me, many organisations, the driver here is that ignorance is often bliss. They can afford, or they feel they're able to bury their head in the sands. And where does that leave them when things go wrong?
Yeah, I think I'd probably add to that the challenge of having a conversation with a solicitor, even a solicitor that is a specialist in HR-related matters, is that they are always going to come at this from a legal standpoint, and practically that might not necessarily be the best solution for the business. It's kind of impossible for them sometimes to come at it with the operational requirement to just actually get on and sort the problem that needs to be sorted in the business with practical, real-world commercial experience. Because that's sometimes a thing that legal professionals do struggle with when it comes to identifying with the SMEs that they have as their clients. For me, I've been in a situation where actually we've taken local consultant support and also local legal support, because they do provide very different things. You do need the solicitor potentially if it is a legal matter, and obviously the local consultant potentially if it's a more operational supporting issue around the issues that come out of employing staff and the processes that need to be put in place in order to do that. For our business specifically, and Red Flag Alert operates across the UK, we run a data integrity practice, and we're working with thousands of SMEs across the UK to help them use data to do better business. Now, I've got to ensure that our officers around the UK are consistent in their approach to the staffing that they have, and as a result of that, the desire for an individual to want to deal with a consultant in the local area is something that I have to kind of rally against, because I need to be able to ensure that there's consistency in that approach. And so a smaller local consultant, apart from the operational and time constraints, Matthew, that you raise in terms of how they are able to cope with the volume of work that might be needed, I can't guarantee that I'm going to get the same level of service for our Reading office office as I might get for our Tewkesbury office, as I might get for our Manchester office. So for me, the sort of local consultant route doesn't really work, and indeed the solicitor has a time and a place, but I'm not sure that necessarily the overarching HR support is really what they're specialists in either.
Okay, so I think through this conversation we're building up a bit of a picture of I think what's important for small businesses, what's important and what's practical. So we're building that kind of idea of that blend of advice, that blend of support, but also timely and delivered in the right way. One of the things that has become very popular, that certainly has been around for a number of years, certainly the last 20-25 years, is the advice-based insurance package that typically has been sold quite aggressively by outsourced providers, typically off the back of tribunal issues for small businesses, and typically on quite long contracts. So, I've seen some people tied into contracts for up to 7 years. Again, from my experience, a lot of these packages tend to be just that, packages that are off the shelf. You kind of get what you pay for in this sense, but typically the small business is therefore locked into a package for a number of years. And I think the fundamental issue here is that organisation is then bound by advice that they're given because of the insurance underpins the advice. So, if an organisation wants to review what their options are and therefore go against the advice, they're potentially at risk of invalidating their insurance. So, the question I think I'd like to pose to you, Dan, is this something you've had experience of, and how practical do you think it is in practice?
Well, yes, man. I've got direct experience of exactly the situation that you described there, where actually the insurance gets in the way of useful advice. So, because these services are backed by insurance policies, the individuals providing the support to the business have always got half an eye on that, and that gets in the way of actually just getting the job done, getting the issue resolved, getting the member of staff in or out of the business, depending on what the situation may be. So, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this route. I think it's a sort of supermarket approach to the service, because ultimately they're trying to standardise things to the policy rather than the requirements of the SMEs that they're looking at working with. And I can see how, if it's sold usually presumably over the telephone, that it might seem attractive to a business person to go down this road. But practically, I think for most established businesses, planning for something for 3 to 5 years is a difficult thing to do. So 7-year commitment would be quite challenging, because business can change quite a lot in that space of time. For an SME that might be going through a more dramatic growth phase, then definitely that's a period of time which is too long to be planning for. We it was typically for us working with our franchisees around the UK, we're working on sort of 12-month business plans with a quarterly review around it, because as the business develops, it's quite a dynamic thing to be involved in. And ultimately, if somebody signs up for a 7-year commitment on what they think they may need now, and 5 or 6 years down the line it's sort of not fit for purpose, then you're tied in for a period of time which is just not suitable for what your business needs. So no, I think it's a little bit too much of a one-size-fits-all approach, this, and as I say, practically the advice that tends to come out of it doesn't tend to come from a place of operationally trying to resolve the issue at hand. It's got too much of an eye on the insurance policy, which could ultimately be affected by the decisions taken or not.
So, I think on that, we also look at the tribunal process, as we mentioned earlier, and is an insured package relevant to today's environment with regard to pre-conciliation? So, we've seen in the last year tribunals or cases reaching tribunal literally dropping off a cliff. The numbers have dropped dramatically. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cases themselves have reduced. It just means that they've been dealt with and managed in a different way. So, is an insured approach the right thing for businesses today? That's a question I'll leave hanging. The next area that I think is something that is common across small organisations is the sort of that added value advice or support that they can get through affiliation to memberships or networks within which they operate. And these are varied, and a small organisation can be flooded with these. And many of these operations can offer some really valuable insight and some really valuable support to your small business owner. But I suppose the question again is how valuable is this as the business grows? How tailorable is this? Who keeps these organisations up to? What's their level of experience in dealing with these issues? It could be great that this is a starter in terms of getting a business on the road with compliance, but is that there for the business to grow and develop, and is it going to support the business in the future? So again, Dan, is this something you've had experience of?
It is, yeah, and I think I'd probably sort of sum it up by sort of saying free tends to be free for a reason. So I can understand how the membership-based organisation would want to provide a value add to their membership, and I can see at some level where some of the more generic advice that can be provided could be useful as part of that service. But I think in most organisations you quite quickly get into an area where what you do, and as a result of that by extension what your staff do, becomes very particular to you in the industry that you operate in, and I'm just not sure when that's the instance whether these sort of free services are able to provide the correct level of support. So better than nothing, I would say, but ultimately at the end of the day probably transitionally something that a small business would look at until they get to a point of thinking seriously about the team of staff that they bring in, at which point they would probably need somebody to be looking after this in a slightly different way.
So that leads us to probably one of the scariest options for small businesses, and I say scary because if I was a small business owner, this would be something that would keep me up at night if it was an option that I was considering, and that really is to do nothing. So I understand that for many people working in small businesses, you don't know what you don't know. So it may not be the case that you're being ignorant to the issues that you're experiencing. It just could be that you don't know that they're issues yet. But also for small businesses where you have a fewer number of employees, there's clearly an economy of scale. So smaller businesses, less employees, less issues perhaps. Or equally, a family business, we're close-knit, the MD's door is always open. But that doesn't stop the fact that these issues could be simmering within the organisation. We're all aware of the no-win, no-fee culture. We're all aware of the pub lawyer, the person down the pub who's happy to tell us you can't do that or your company can't do that. And we talked earlier about the media-savvy employee who probably knows more than the business owner about what's right and what's wrong, or thinks they do. So, let's be honest, this just simply can't be an option for a business that's looking to grow. And surely this is something that's just not a serious option for a business owner that's looking to drive that business forward.
No, I mean I'd agree totally with everything that you said there, Matthew. I think ultimately once you're serious about business, then sort of ignoring this is not an issue. I think small business people do face a challenge when they're working in that quite sort of tight-knit community of the early days of a business and the individuals that work within it, where there's a lot of sort of Dunkirk spirit going on. Everyone's in it together, and we're all building this thing together, and that's great. Culturally, that's fantastic. Culturally, it's a very healthy thing for the organisation to be able to engender that level of involvement from the staff members. But everything's fine when it's fine. When there's a problem, what happens then? And ultimately, from our point of view, with our business perspective, with Red Flag Alert, one of the challenges we see for SMEs is that they are worried that if they take the step into employing staff, will they be able to maintain their business growth to be able to cover the costs of that member of staff? They also need to bear in mind that there are costs associated with not having the right framework in place in order to deal with the things that member of staff may do when they're there, or the challenges of a legal structure outside of the SME's control. Ultimately, the SME has to, if they're going to grow and develop, this is a step they've got to take into taking it seriously. As soon as you've got staff, you have staff issues, whether they're positive or negative issues, and ultimately then there's got to be somebody who has some degree of responsibility for doing that. So doing nothing really is not an option.
So Dan, you've felt this firsthand in a number of areas, and as a business leader, you've been through this process, and we've gained some great insight into what the options are that are out there for small businesses. But having been through this process, what did you decide to do, and what was important for you when making the decision to protect your organisations?
Well, I mean, I think the first instance, we as we said already, I've come from a point of view of seeing most of the different approaches to this over the years in different organisations, and we wanted to ensure that when we took our franchise to market, we were a very well established business. We've sort of 10 years of trading behind us prior to becoming a franchise organisation, so we tend to do things the right way, and as a result of that, part of doing things the right way was ensuring that we had the right level of support in place for our franchisees. Now, as I said earlier on, that's to do with ensuring that the consistency of the service provided is there, so that our franchisees across the UK get access to the same level of expertise no matter whereabouts they are based. But in the first instance, it's also about making sure that we actually have a solution in place. If we don't, the franchisee could potentially look at us and consider us to be liable for something that they choose to do because we've not provided them with support to ensure that they have an alternative. I didn't want to provide it ourselves internally. Our team provide HR support for us, for the employees of our business as the franchisor, and there is clearly a potential conflict of interest there if we're asking them also to support the franchisees with the issues surrounding the staff of their business. So I needed somebody as an outsourced partner that I could work with. I wasn't persuaded that the insured route and the kind of mass market approach was the right approach because we're a little bit peculiar in the franchise industry. We do things the certain way that we do them because we know it's proven to be successful. And I wanted someone to take the time to understand the vagaries of our industry and our market and to provide me with a solution which was tailored to me as a franchise business and the data integrity business rather than just something off the shelf that would suit any other SME. I also wanted to ensure that the team of people who we were going to be working with were going to be stable, and that the advice provided and that the team providing that advice had been around for some period of time and would be around for some period of time as well. I've had experience in the past of working with organisations where they provide support over the telephone, and the telephone support is provided by a call centre staffed by individuals who are relatively changeable in terms of their approach, and you've often got a different person in a different seat on a different day of the week, and that didn't feel right for what I wanted. The relationship I have with our franchisees is a 5 to 10 year relationship, sometimes longer, and so we needed to be sure that the partner that we selected to work with our franchisees for support was going to be around for that length of time as well, that they were going to be stable, that the people providing the support were going to be experienced and knowledgeable. But also, and I think again it's something that's a little bit peculiar to the franchise industry, that we're very much into procedural process documents, so operations manuals. We write down the good ways of doing things in the organisation in order for people to learn from the mistakes that others have made in the past. And so I was also keen that alongside having the right sort of people at the end of a telephone to be able to provide support, the organisation that we selected also had a very well structured online system enabling access to documentation, which basically became an extension of our franchise operations manual because it was as detailed in talking about the HR issues as our operations manual is in talking about every other aspect of the business. So those were some of the considerations, and it was about making sure that ultimately, from my point of view, the decision we took was well researched and well resourced, because ultimately if I get it wrong, our franchisees look at me and question what other things I might have got wrong as well. So it was important that we did get it right.
Very important. So I'm not ashamed to say, and very pleased to say, that Dan has decided to partner with ADP to provide this support for his franchise partners. And so what does that look like? Well, we've decided to deliver this service in a number of ways, and I think the important thing is that it's a two-pronged approach that works together to provide not just the reactive but also the proactive support and guidance and resource tools that an organisation needs. So following ADP research, we found that 67% of small businesses have no in-house HR or legal support of their own. So the HR Everywhere service from ADP offers exactly that. It offers the tools and the guidance and the support for businesses to be proactive and reactive when it comes to dealing with compliance in the workplace. So how that works in practice is the first area is resource. So most small organisations want to be able to go to a source of information, a source of truth they know that they can rely on that's going to help them to run their business. So Dan talked about processes, we talked about documentation, and we know with compliance, documentation underpins at the foundations of compliance within the workplace. So whether that be across employment law or health and safety, there is an online tool that organisations can use in order to keep not just up to date, but also make use of key templates, processes, line management guides, tools to make sure that the foundations of that compliance within the workplace is not just compliant, but is also well managed. The second area, which sort of dovetails really closely to this, is pragmatic support and advice. So the online portal gives a business the ability to be able to get access to the information that they need, but there's also a team of people that are under the phone that are able to help the organisation wade not just through the complexities of those foundations, but also deal with issues as and when they occur. So the important thing that we've learned from some of the options that are out there in the marketplace is this doesn't need, or this can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. It needs to be tailored. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be dedicated to the organisation and not just regurgitating employment law or health and safety law. So the advice that is delivered through the HR Everywhere service is not just legalistic, but it's also pragmatic. It's commercially driven, and it's designed to work for the business, not against. And I think they're the two fundamental parts of the package. So Dan, we've talked a little bit about what was important to you, but what within that kind of package offering were the key things that made you decide to partner with ADP?
As I've mentioned already, going down to meet the team at your call centre and sort of being sort of reassured there that they're knowledgeable individuals. These are not just people who've been brought in to man a desk and work through a software solution on screen and give a standardised response. These are people that actually do genuinely know what they're talking about and actually have been there for a period of time long enough to be able to be familiar with the regular clients and the kind of queries that come out of those regular clients. So that sort of shared best practice comes out of that. I think the approach that ADP have taken specifically with regard to the franchise industry is absolutely the right way of doing it. You've taken the time to understand the sector and how we operate, and prior to sort of offering the service, you've refined it sufficiently well to be able to ensure that it is tailored for the sort of concerns that a franchise business may have. And from my point of view, ultimately, as we expand our franchise network, and we're looking at growing at a rate of sort of between 7 and 10 offices per year, each of those offices are independent small business people. They operate underneath the red flag alert banner, and they follow our systems and our procedures. But they are new business launches, and they are new business launches that are going to need support in this area. So for us, we were looking at an organisation that could grow with us, that was flexible enough to address the specific things that we needed within our organisation. But culturally, that was a good fit for us as well in terms of sort of the professional approach to make sure that things are done the right way. And that our franchisees are supported the right way as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Dan. So that kind of brings us, I think, to the end of the sort of the key areas that we wanted to discuss on the webinar today. And for me, it was building up a picture really of what's important for small businesses, what's realistic and what's practical. There are many things that are out there for small businesses, both in terms of pressure, in terms of support, and it's making sure that whatever support that the business takes is aligned to the business and is aligned to that business in terms of whether it's in growth mode or whether it's in protection mode.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. We have already had some questions coming through. So the first one is, as a small business, it feels right to have a consolidated approach to HR. My bank or local chamber offers an HR helpline, and it feels like they should care and offer me a great service. So why would outsourcing to HR Everywhere be better?
No, I'm happy to take that, actually. So I think we've talked already a little bit about the free services that are provided as by banks or by chambers of commerce, and they tend to be sort of limited in their approach. And ultimately, the point at which the service needs to join up is not something that you'd necessarily see until you had an issue that you were facing and realised that the service that you got for free didn't provide you with the level of support that you needed. So, for me, the choice on why you would use HR Everywhere would be because no matter what the employment world might throw at you, it can cover you and can help you and support you through that process. And it's not just limited to the bits that the chamber or that the bank have chosen to involve in the free service that they provide.
And just to pick up on that point, I think, Dan, that HR Everywhere is the support service for the employer. So there are many support services that are out there that perhaps lean towards the employee. So I think when you're talking about who do I go to get that support, that is HR Everywhere. It's not just the online resource, but it's also the pragmatic and commercial advice. And I think from a small business owner, they need to have trust in the quality of advice, but also the fact that advice is supporting them as a business owner and their business.
Okay, I've got another question. So once we've called the HR Everywhere service, can we speak to the same consultant again, or is it potluck who we get on the phone, and who are they?
So for me, the critical thing that underpins the advice piece within HR Everywhere is the quality of the people that are providing the advice. So the thing that is really important is that the HR Everywhere advisory team are a blend of employment law and CIPD trained practitioners. So we talked earlier about the importance of having that legalistic and also the more HR driven advice. It's also important that these individuals understand commercially how businesses operate. So the team that provide the advice are individuals that have a significant number of years post-qualification experience. Many have worked in business, and actually the desire for them to work within the HR Everywhere team is because they want to have the ability to have a varied range of conversations. So they're not working within one organisation, they're dealing with supporting many organisations. So they've got a real varied background in terms of their levels of experience. And for me, that's critical because it means that they've dealt with these issues many, many times before. They understand the commercial pressures of an organisation. So they're not just telling you what the law says, they're giving you options. So as a business owner, you are empowered to make the right decision for your organisation today. And that may be a slightly different approach to the decision you made last week. You understand where the law sits, you understand where your potential risks are, but you're making an informed decision that's right for the business today.
I think if I can add to that, Matthew, that was one of the things that we looked quite hard at when we selected ADP as a partner for these services. Was, I actually did take the time to go and sit with the team answering those calls and understand exactly how they deal with them. And as I say, the stability within that team was impressive. The individuals have been there for a good period of time, and an understanding not only of the systems operated but also of the businesses that they were providing support to. Our organisation and Red Flag Alert is a data provider. We work on business intelligence, and ultimately the tool we have is an intangible thing. The people providing the service enable it to be real, and I'd probably say that's a decent parallel for the way we saw ADP approaching it. The team answering those inquiries there had IT support to ensure that if one individual wasn't available, then someone else knew what had gone on previously. But where possible, they were actually ensuring that the same consultant handled the inquiry each time. So, as an SME ringing up, I knew that my franchisee would be able to get hold of hopefully the same person, and there would be some consistency across that. So that was really important for us.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So the next one, what's the difference between outsourcing to HR Everywhere and ACAS? Why wouldn't I speak to them?
So I kind of alluded, I think, to this a little bit earlier. So ACAS is a fantastic organisation in terms of the support that it provides. With its recent increase in responsibility around pre-conciliation, it's taking on a significantly heightened role. And in many areas, the support that ACAS provides is employee centric. Not always, but certainly that could be a fear that a business owner might quite reasonably take. HR Everywhere is, as we've mentioned, is the employer's advice. It's the employer's source of truth, and it's the tools and it's the pragmatic commercial support that a business owner can trust to inform them and it's a very, very important point, but this is all about supporting the business and making sure that the business is empowered. And that's, I think, really where HR Everywhere as a two-pronged approach really adds value to organisations, small and large.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. We are an overseas company looking to employ people in the UK. Can the service help us with the fundamentals like setting up contracts?
Very much so. So, yeah, one of the key parts of the HR Everywhere service is the online portal, as we've mentioned. The online portal is an up-to-date and compliant set of tools and guides and support for an organisation. That comes in a number of forms. So one of the key areas for an organisation is to make sure that their documentation, the things that they've got in place is not just compliant today, but it's compliant tomorrow. So whether you're an organisation that's coming into the UK or whether you're an organisation that's already in the UK that's looking to stay up to date, make sure that they've got things that are compliant. The online portal is where you would go to get access to that information. So where many organisations may fall foul today is a lot of this information is free and readily available, but how confident are they that it's up to date? Well, this is exactly what the online portal will deliver. It's up to date and compliant and is a source of truth that organisations can trust.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. And sadly, I think that will need to be the last question. Any questions you've sent through that haven't been answered by Dan and Matthew will be answered following the webinar by email, and responses will come back to you. If you're attending live, you'll receive your pair of headphones shortly. So thanks to Dan and Matthew for being great speakers today, and thanks to all of you for attending. I hope you found the conversation useful, and for more information on upcoming events, please visit adp.co.uk/event-diary or email me at karen.brett@adp.com. If you'd like some more information about HR Everywhere, you can find further details on our website under the Small Business section. Thanks and bye.